I'm going to continue to develop the veins in the petals and in the leaves. And I want to point out, I lifted out some color with a tool that I love to use. It's called an incredible nib. Let me show you how I use it. Like, for example, if I want to establish a highlight along this line, the way I go about it is I dampen the entire area. Then I take my tool, I don't press too hard. I sort of draw with it. Rinse it off, and I continue with light pressure, gradually developing a light area just where I want it. And that highlight will work nicely there. While working on the veins in the petal, I decided, I'm looking at the stem, and that's one of the last things that remains to be done at this stage of development. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask out the stem, work in my background, and then when that's dry, remove the masking material and paint in the stem. So let's do that. Got my nasty masking fluid. Be really brave. I'm going to take my number 6 brush. If I don't regret this, too late now. I'm going to flow a bead of masking material. Right along the stem. See how I do that? Minimal brushing. I flow a significant amount of masking material. I don't brush it on thinly. I apply it thickly. Okay, good. That was quick. It's basically dry except for an area I just dampened. And I have worked in all the detail I really want to work in. And I'm looking at the photograph of the flower, and I see there's sort of a subtle yellow shift in some of these petals, pushing it towards the orange, red-orange end of the spectrum. And I'd like to work that in. I think that'll enrich my watercolor. Now I'm going to flow in very subtle wash of Windsor yellow. Yeah, the yellow carries through over here too. Although I'm wetting individual petal at a time, I really could have just wet the whole thing and worked in some yellow. But I like doing it this way. I get a sense of more control. Let's take a closer look at this petal here. I think it could use a little yellow enhancement. So, I'll dampen the whole thing. Especially the lines that I created using the incredible nib. think pushing them closer to the yellow end of the spectrum will help the overall look. I continued to develop the veins. I laid in the wash of yellow to enrich the hibiscus a little bit, and I could continue to play around with this detail. But at this level of development, I'd like to work in the background and move this towards completion. Now, I could do one of two things. I could either paint directly into the background, or I can mask the foreground with my masking material, and then I could freely develop the background without worrying about damaging anything. But I don't think that's necessary, because the shapes of the flower are relatively simple. I could wash around them fairly easy. Since I haven't stretched the paper, what happens when I start applying the paint to the surface is the paper fibers on the surface will start to expand as they absorb moisture, and it's going to want to curl sort of like this. Well, the way I counteract that, and it's only possible to do this because this is a small piece. This is 11 inches by 8 inches. So what I do is I wet the back, thoroughly wet the back. When you wet the back, then lay it flat and cover it for about 5 minutes. The paper hydrates itself and totally flattens out. Then after I uncover it, I apply water to the surface and I begin my painting. So I'm painting into a wet surface. I don't touch this area here. I leave that dry, of course, where I have to add the background. Prepared my watercolor for the background. I like to get these bins and mix colors, get ready to go. Alizarin crimson, brown madder, quinacridone yellow, Winsor yellow, cobalt blue. For my gray, I'm going to use a mixture of brown madder and Antwerp blue. That gives me a nice gray. Often I also use neutral tint for my gray. Here's my magenta, pre-mixed green, and Antwerp blue. And I should have cobalt blue here somewhere. I do. There we go. Cobalt blue. I use cobalt blue all the time for shadow areas, and it's going to be very effective in the background. I'd also like to point out the photo that we've been doing. I'm not going to render an out-of-focus grass area that we see here, but I do refer to the color combinations in a photo like this as suggestions as to a way to go. I want my background to be loosely applied, free-flowing applications of color that intermix on their own. Here, let's move up for a sec and take a look at the painting I showed you a while back. It gives you a good idea of how I approach my backgrounds. Let's begin. Using cold water, take my watercolor and I run the water on the back of my painting. Then I place the watercolor in the container like that. There we go. And I'm going to cover it. And I snap the cover into place. And after about 5 minutes of being in there, the painting is completely flat and I can start painting. Since it's a small painting, this technique works nicely. Okay, let's see what we got. About 5 minutes have passed, maybe a little bit more. And we open this up. And there we go. It's relatively flat. Now, I take it one step further. I'm about to sail into this in paint, referring to my photograph laying in the background, paraphrasing the background, not copying it exactly. What I want to do at this point is dampen the areas that are going to become the background. I want to paint wet into wet. Okay, I'm ready to begin. I'm looking at my photo for reference, and I see this area is relatively dark. So that's how I'm going to start. Here I'm using my mixture of brown matter and Antwerp blue. I'll take my round brush just to get close to the edges. What I like about mixing my grays is I get all sorts of hints of other colors going on. It's a very natural looking gray. Beautiful. Yeah, I see blues, I see browns. Takes on a nice earthy, natural kind of quality. I'm looking, I see, I don't know if they're out of focus stems or what. This is a significantly dark area, and I like that. I think that'll help my watercolor. I'm working in some cobalt blue up here. And interestingly enough, there's strange things going on up here with the quinacridone gold. Yeah, that seems, that kind of golden brown does seem to be a color that works into the background in areas. Maybe out of focus leaves. Also, I see how we have a little bit of room for some stronger blue down here. Lots of deep colors. I don't always use burnt sienna. Once upon a time I used it constantly. Now I tend to mix my browns more than rely on the pre-made colors, but burnt sienna works very nice in this area. I just destroyed my photo, I should mention that. I splattered it with water in the process. That's okay. It served its purpose. I like the transition that's developing between the darker area and the lighter area. I'm going to tilt it, allow some of that excess water to flow away. See how nice and flat it's laying? You have to be careful doing this, that you really don't get carried away with the background and go crazy with your colors. I also see some hints of brown and gold up here, so I'd like to take a little of my quinacridone. I could also use yellow ochre. Work that in there. Work that in there. Very beautiful color. the watercolor is completely dry, and I like the way the color paraphrases the out of focus quality of the back that I see in the photo. There are very subtle hints of other colors going on, some browns, some reds, dark grays. Then as we move over to this area, you'll see the lighter greens. In the photo, in fact I can lay it there and show you. In the photo, you have an out of focus area of green. And this is what I mean by paraphrasing. I didn't want to paint that. I actually can't. In fact, if I grab my airbrush, I could make an exact copy of that, but why bother? I think this is better looking. I also like what happens with the light in this area, the way it transitions from slightly darker colors to the light. What remains to be done now is I need to remove the masking material over here, and I'll paint in the stem. I could continue to work on the details. For example, in an area like this, the petal of the flower actually folds over upon itself. What I probably should do is mix a little bit of cobalt blue and gray and darken that area so it feels like it goes under the petal. Now that it's thoroughly dry, I'm going to remove the masking. You can rub it with your finger, actually. That would take this off. I like to use this ugly looking thing. Believe it or not, what this is an accumulation of masking that I have removed from my watercolors over the past year. And it's really nasty looking. But it's effective. And here's what I do with this crazy looking thing. The masking likes to stick to itself. So I just begin to work it against the masking on the paper, and then I gently turn it, and it lifts it right up. This started from a little ball of masking material that I rolled off the paper as I was removing it. And it just continues to grow and grow and grow. That's it. Now I'm looking at my photos, and I see the stems actually are a combination of brown and green. It looks like there's brown as a base color, and the green is burning through. So how will I approach that? First thing I'm going to do is dampen the area. Now I'm going to start with my burnt sienna. It's beautiful, warm brown. One of my favorite colors. Okay. Like to give it a slight angle. Then into the burnt sienna, I'm going to flow my green, which is a mixture of Antwerp blue and Windsor yellow. I like to work a little more yellow into that. That's about it. We'll let that dry. When you think of what this watercolor actually is, it's a result of the natural flows and interactions of the color that I placed on wet paper. Nowhere has the colors been brushed in a rendering type of approach. The closest you come to that maybe is in areas like this, where I articulated the individual veins. The stem is dry now, and I like what happened. I left it alone, I let the colors flow, and now I have nice hints of yellow, brown, and green. The last thing that remains to be done is to remove the masking material from here, and I'd like to show you one last thing. I like to put a border around these. I paint a border. So let's begin. First, we'll take that ugly accumulation of masking material and remove that bit of masking right there. Whenever you remove masking, you have to make sure everything is absolutely dry. If not, you'll damage the watercolor. And very carefully begin to lift it up. Yes, the colors are coming alive in that area now. Okay, that's nice. Now, to apply a border, I use one of these transparent rulers because it gives you an easy way to see where you're drawing the border. I'm going to have a relatively thin border on this. I guess it's about 1 centimeter. I use my pre-mixed colors. I always start with my gray, and usually in the right hand corner for some reason. And I work it this way. I work both sides, and I sort of expand out. And after I do that, I make sure I have clean water. I clean my brush, and I'm going to go into a burnt sienna. I'm flowing. I'm not brushing in a border. I'm flowing the pigment in, and then I'll flow pigment into pigment, as you see me doing here. It's really a nice effect. A little alizarin crimson. Back to my gray, which is a mixture of Antwerp blue and brown madder. Find a little quinacridone and see what it does. Yes. There is one last thing. The watercolor is completely dry. The board is dry, but there's still one last thing to do. Sign your work, and I like to find an appropriate lower area to sign it in. In this case, I think right over there would be perfect. I like to use, you could sign it in anything, pencil, watercolor paintbrush. I like to use these things. This is a Faber-Castelli artist pen with a fine tip.